welcome to RetroforceGO. Oh shoot! I almost knocked my headset off my head. And welcome to RetroforceGO. Hey.
And welcome to RetroforceGO. Destructoids, blah 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 blah. Retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's one and only retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. Go! Force Retro!
You said it backwards.
That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Like, literally 5 seconds before we started, I was like, ooh, I'm going to do something clever, and then it came out, and I was like, not so clever. Anyway, everyone, welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome.
Okay, that was remarkable.
Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. Blah. And welcome to RetroforceGO. Alright, quiet, let me do it. Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. Ask him if he wants to host the podcast from now on.
Do you want to host the Mr. Destructoid podcast?
Yeah.
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 Alright, I'm out of a job.
Can we get him to give us an and welcome?
Oh, can
Yeah,
you do
that?
and welcome? No.
Oh, well, that's okay. Maybe he's not ready for being a host. He needs some training.
Not right now.
It's a
Well,
big responsibility to say the and welcome.
yeah,
It
it's a
is.
big deal. It's like
It's a
it
big-
is a big deal. It's very stressful. And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome to Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. You don't want to know why. really do not want to know why we're laughing.
And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGO. Yo, this is Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGO. Ho ho ho, listeners. And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. Hey guys, before we get started, it's the end of the year, and I've been working on something all year long. I want to know what you guys think.
Is it made of macaroni and glue?
It is not made of macaroni and glue.
Oh.
It's an audio thing. I've actually been working on an impression of Dyson. Now, being like the new host since Dyson's been gone has been really stressful, really tough, because he's so awesome. But I think I got him down, so I think I'm going to try it out if you guys don't mind. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast.
That's pretty
How-
fucking good, Chad.
Yeah, well,
That was
thank you.
really
Thank you.
good.
And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's #1 retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGO, Destructoid's Oh wait, someone told me that it's not #1. It's supposed to be Destructoid's only retro podcast.
Oh.
Someone that listens to all the shows called me out last week, and they were like, "Chad, you changed it somehow to the whatever I was saying before." So I apologize. So I'm going to bring it back old school from now on.
Yeah, but Dyson always said #1.
Yeah, see, I
Yeah.
thought that, but apparently that's not true.
Apparently I've been on 76 episodes plus of this podcast. And that's what
Well,
Dyson
I-
says.
Then I agree with you because this person said that he didn't say number one podcast. He said only retro podcast. But maybe I agree with you then. Maybe
He has
I-
a few times, but normally he says number
well,
one.
then I'm going to say number one because I like that better. So, oh well, that didn't last long.
Wouldn't we rather be number one?
I agree. Well, that lasted for about 45 seconds. Sorry, guys. I'm going back to the old way. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's most amazing, best ever, finger bang-tastic,
Finger bang.
amazingly awesome number one retro podcast.
Woo!
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one finger bang-tastic podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And
I got this. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. This is your host, Dyson, joining you on episode 85, Listener Questions, Show Outline. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, special episode X.
Is that the sound of X?
Yeah, you know, I think like the two lines would shoot up and be like.
Yeah, I like
X,
that.
right?
Let's go with
Yeah,
that.
and it'd like flash. Destructoid's number one retro podcast, of course.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And I'm chewing gum. I'm gonna spit it out in a second because it's time to do some RetroforceGo.
So appropriate.
Ugh. You want to listen to me chomping on gum all week. Welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast. This is your host, Chad Conselmo. And welcome to RetroforceGo, Destructoid's number one retro podcast.
Next week is the big show.
Oh yeah.
100.
Number 100, we made it.
Yeah,
Can't
come on.
believe
Yes.